recruits the footballers for West Ham is a complex puzzle. Not just now, because it appears within the last, certainly half an hour, the top source at the club has absolutely categorically confirmed that Mohammed Kudus was a Tim Steidten player. Why does it matter? I don't know. I'm interested. I'm as guilty as anyone as being interested in this stuff. And I think the reason it's interested, it points to who has the power at the club at any given time. But this is nothing new. Far from it. I remember when Pellegrini came in and he had Huselos as his number 2, or maybe his technical director, or whatever you want to call it, recruitment director. These things are so confusing, by the way. And we signed a number of players, but one of the players we signed was Issa Diop. And you may well remember the story, and that was, but Issa Diop is not, in fact, a Huselos player or a Pellegrini player. He's a David Sullivan player. The rumour was that I think Jack Sullivan had recommended Issa Diop to his dad. Now, this was a story at the time, because when we signed Diop, I think it was a bit of a surprising signing. He was the future of French football. We'd come from Toulouse. I think he was 19, something like that. And he was already a captain at 19. I remember that at Toulouse, certainly. So who signed him? What was quite interesting, really. And it was almost as if, I don't know, who gets the bragging rights for selecting a player? Maybe it's something as simple as that. But it wasn't the only one. I think sometimes when signings go wrong, the signing would get attributed to somebody. So let's go with Jordan Hugill. That was always attributed to David Moyes. It was an easy one. That was a tap-in, wasn't it? Because he'd come from Preston. David Moyes had come from Preston. He still had big contacts there. There's no reason to disbelieve that. And it goes on and it goes on. And until relatively recently, we signed Said Benrahma. And of course, Said Benrahma, the narrative was, this is not David Moyes signing. This is, we don't know who signing it was. Was it, I don't know, was Tony Henry still here? They remember him. Was it Rob Newman's? Possibly he wasn't here. I don't know, it all gets so complicated. But the story was that David Moyes had wanted Abire Eze, who obviously in the end went to Crystal Palace. Couldn't get him. We didn't get the money for Grady Diangana in time. So in the end, David Sullivan went and bought Said Benrahma. I don't know how much truth is in there. It could be absolutely nothing in it. But that was the story. And it's important to know that. Because I think sometimes these stories can confirm who's in charge. Sometimes they can undermine somebody, whatever. Anyway, the narrative, I think, very much in terms of the most recent transfer window was interesting because we had brought in a director of football. It was further muddied by the fact that when we were chasing that Manchester City winger who was Gorgeous Borges, wasn't it? Ended up going to City. Apparently, that was a Rob Newman selection. It gets so complicated. But it was interesting because Tim Steidten had come in. So how many of the current crop have been recruited by Tim Steidten? It's important because it tells us about the balance of power at the club. The first thing we heard was that, I think in terms of Adson Alvarez, and I believe it was ex-West Ham United employee who said, well, this is a Mark Noble signing. Man, this is getting complicated. That was a Mark Noble signing. Mark Noble had been dispatched to watch Ajax last season. He'd spotted Edson Alvarez and said, this is the guy. This is the guy we need to sign. This could be Declan's replacement. Turns out, whoever recruited him turns out to be a very, very shrewd bit of business. He's a really good player. He's a fine player. Do you know what? It's quite funny, actually. You never knew we needed a defensive midfielder. They sort of were dovetailing. Over the past 2 or 3 seasons, either Souček or Declan Rice was doing it. Declan Rice is such an adaptable player. He could either do that or he could, do a sort of box-to-box midfielder role. Actually turns out now, when we don't have a defensive midfielder, I think you almost miss him. He's only been here 5 minutes, Alvarez. When he's not playing, I feel like we miss him. We're going to find out, I guess, against Brentford. So, you know what? Good scout, good recruitment, 5-star recruitment on that one. James Ward-Prowse is really easy to call. It was clearly a David Moyes signing. So that was the board saying, yes, you know what, you can have him. I think had we have got Harry Maguire, that absolutely also would have been a David Moyes signing. But it was quite interesting. I think that we weren't willing to push the boat out to the extent that, as I understand it, and I might be wrong with the figures here, but the gist of what I'm saying is the same, that Harry Maguire wanted to leave Manchester United a £5 million loyalty payment. If we'd have really wanted him, we could have said to Harry Maguire, look, we'll give you the £5 million and then we pay Manchester United whatever they want and we get Harry Maguire, right? But it was quite telling that the board didn't want to go that final bit to try and recruit him. So we end up buying Konstantinos Mavropanos instead. Clearly a Tim Steidten pick because he's come from the Bundesliga and he looks really, really good, doesn't he? But anyway, so we just find out today that Mohammed Kudus is a Tim Steidten player. It's been confirmed by a top source at the club. And by the way, the source is... The source is bona fide. I always feel like I'm about to talk about condiments at that point. We're talking about a sauce, not a sauce, not like something you put on your chips, obviously. But it's very, very good. This is it comes from the highest possible source. Let's put it that way. So Kudus being signed as a Tim Steidten pick, I think, is incredibly important, and I also say I think it's incredibly exciting. You often wonder when you sell a player, particularly with Declan Rice, how's the money going to be invested? We've done so incredibly well. You could make the case that we would get our money back or get more money for all of the players, all the 4 players we recruited. I know I discussed it in yesterday's video about Mavropanos. Would we get £25 million back on James Ward-Prowse? I think we would. So, well done, David Moyes. A bloody good signing. Edson Alvarez is clearly worth more now than when we bought him. Mavropanos, we pay £17 million for him. The way he's going, he looks much better than that. I think we've got a bit of a bargain there with him. Kudus, £34 million. I mean, he's already... I would not be surprised by the end of the season, Kudus is looking like a £100 million player. And as I mentioned in previous videos, it actually ends up being him that Liverpool are looking at rather than Jarrod Bowen to replace Mo Salah. I don't even want to talk that much about it. He looks that good. He really does. But the fact that Tim Steidten has highlighted him, when I say it's exciting to think that whoever we try and get in next is going to be really good. It's also exciting to think that there's somebody that is yielding that much power at West Ham. And I think it's really, really important that Steidten does have as much influence as he's clearly having. It's really hard because there's so much smoke and mirrors with it, and sometimes you're at a situation where some people are reporting Steidten's close to walking out because he has no influence, and then it goes from that to this, which is actually more or less he's in charge of transfers and he has lots of influence. Look, clearly they can't both be true, or maybe it has just evolved that quickly. The truth, as ever, is probably somewhere directly in the middle. He probably, remember that report, he was going to have a punch up, him and David Moyes almost had a punch up. Quite possibly there was no punch up, and quite possibly he has not got total control, and that's fine. The fact that he has as much as he has is really, really important. I've often wondered why West Ham board were not more cross with David Moyes over some of the losses he made in terms of player value. We'll get back to the subject of who chose which player. Nikola Vlasic, massive losses made of him. Again, it was a case of, well, that's not Moyes' player. I don't know. I'm not so sure. But whether he was or whether he wasn't, if you're the manager, you are clearly presiding over a player who might be worth whatever he was, 25 million. You have still overseen his depreciation in value. Whether you signed him, whether you didn't, it's up to you to involve him so the club don't hemorrhage money like that. And I'd also, whilst Sebastian Haller was not David Moyes' pick, he was still a £42 million player, was West Ham's record ever signing. I think David Moyes probably owed it to the club to try and get a bit more out of him before we suffered what was basically over a £20 million loss in an 18-month period. West Ham cannot afford to keep losing increments of 20 million. We really can't. Then you have the Gianluca Scamacca thing. It's so easy to say all of these players that David Moyes would lose money on and didn't work out under David Moyes. So easy to say, all those players weren't Moyes' picks. I don't know. I'm not so sure. I just think we've been really bad at buying and selling players for so many years. I'm pleased it's better now. But my point is, I was always surprised that the board didn't say, well, hold on, Moyes, you keep losing this money. We're going to have to do something different. And maybe they just did. Maybe I didn't need to wonder. Maybe the board were cross about it. And maybe this is the net result of that happening. Maybe what we're seeing now is Tim Steidten basically making sure that the club don't lose that sort of money anymore. In essence, West Ham have brought a specialist in. And it's not before time. It's really not. So I was delighted. I'm absolutely delighted for two reasons. Number one, that Tim Steidten picked him, and number two, that David Moyes is playing him. Now, I understand. Look, a leopard ain't going to change his spots totally. I think if we concede for a moment that, let's just accept this, we might be out slightly, we might find out differently in the future, but just for the argument's sake, for me to make my point, let's say David Moyes picked James Ward-Prowse, Mark Noble picked Edson Alvarez, and then Tim Steidten picked Mavropanos and Kudus. The first one to find his way into the team was James Ward-Prowse, David Moyes' pick. The second one to find his way into the team was Edson Alvarez, Mark Noble's pick. So you see where I'm going with this. The latter two have required a little bit more. He's been a little bit more cautious, hasn't he, David Moyes, because Tim Steidten's players weren't his picks. However, I'm sort of hopeful now that maybe David Moyes, because listen, whether you want David Moyes to stay or whether you don't want David Moyes to stay, he's here for the remainder of the season, and we are going to buy some players in January or bring some in on loan. Might be a loan with an option to buy. We're going to bring players in January. We have to, because the squad ain't deep enough, and we've got the African Cup of Nations. So if you can see that David Moyes, as I mentioned in previous videos, David Moyes not going to lose these 6 games in a row, because he's not that bad a manager. He's really not. And then we have borderline world-class players in the team. We just don't. We're not Luton Town. We're West Ham United. All right, we've got some really, really good players. So irrespective of whether you want him here or you don't want him here, he's probably here until the end of the season. So actually, bearing in mind he's here, what do we want him to do? I want him to pick Tim Steidten's players and play them in the team. That's what I want him to do. And this gives me some hope with that. It really does. That whoever I don't even know, I'm going to call him Tim. Whoever Mr. Steidten brings him in the January window, he's going to play him. David Moyes is going to not only play him, but have faith, want to. He's going to think, do you know what? I've got faith in the director of football now, that his players are going to be good, so I'm going to throw him straight in there. He's good, a little bit cautious, but he has played them. Kudus has now been so good. Sorry, there's somebody in the chat yesterday was really annoyed about him pronouncing Kudus. Kudus. Do you know what? I don't care. I don't care. I may well change it. Let's be fair. It took me a year to go from Paqueta to Paquetá. So I may get there eventually. If it annoys you that much, switch off. Well, mute me. Mute will do you no good. Have you ever seen the subtitles? By the way, have you ever clicked on the subtitles? They're not. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know if it just picks up on American accents or something. But the YouTube subtitles, if you want to laugh, put them on now. It doesn't know what the hell I'm talking about, by the way. But you know what? I just think this is an element of trust is being built, is what I'm saying, between Tim Steidten and David Moyes. I think it's really, really important that develops and that continues. Anyway, good news. I thought it was really, really good news. Mohammed Kudus is, or whatever you want to call him, Kudus. I don't know. We're going to go with Kudus at the moment. Mohammed Kudus is a Tim Steidten. I think I pronounced that right. A Tim Steidten signing, and that's really, really good news. Before I go, can I please point you in the direction of our Patreon page? The link is in the description below. The reason we are able to upload every day on 2 channels is because 2 reasons. Number 1, because you watch those bloody annoying adverts on this. Well, 3 reasons, actually. Because of our sponsors, wonderful people like ETC Sports, and also because of our wonderful patrons. Basically, they allow myself and Gio to do this as a job. We love it as a job. We really, really do. So what we've made is a Patreon page with our Third Hammers Chat channel. We've got Anton Ferdinand podcast. We've got Hammerlytics podcast. We've got a very, very silly podcast with myself and Gio, and we actually talk about a load of old nonsense. It's basically like two old codgers moaning, but people seem to like it. Non-football related videos. We've got a new podcast which we're starting up as well on there. We've got a position previews, player ratings, breakfast shows, massive discounts to the store, and I can't tell you how good the prizes. We give away signed shirts, we give away match day tickets. We think from the lowest tier is basically from as little as 90p a week. We think that it's really, really good value. We'd really appreciate it if you go and check it out, go and try it out, and if you don't like it, we've got a 7-day trial at the moment. You can cancel it. Anyway, I'm going to go now. I will catch you tomorrow. We've got a game.